So it's a lot sort of lost in the mists of time to a degree. I had a woman who took care of me when I was a kid, who had a Commodore 64. And it has BASIC. When you boot up a Commodore 64, it's got BASIC built into it. And so some of the first code that I wrote was BASIC on the Commodore 64. Probably, much like screen time with kids today. Like, this was the way that this person got me to quit bugging them to read stories to me or something like that. So that's the very first code that I remember. But I didn't do a lot of coding until high school, where I tried to teach myself how to code fairly unsuccessfully, honestly. And then when I got to college, you get the course book, and I looked through the course book, and not the only things, but one of the set of courses that were really interesting to me were these computer programming courses. And so I guess that would be the moment when I thought about becoming a developer. I think I didn't really know, actually, if you're a freshman, what do you know about careers? But then when I was a senior, obviously looking for jobs, it was obvious that this was a good fit for me, and the industry was growing. It was the late 90s, and the industry was growing a lot, so it was a good opportunity. I started at GTE Labs. So GTE was a telephone company. It's now part of Verizon, I think. And I was in their labs, which is sort of the old telephony labs, sort of like AT&T labs, and they have sort of a storied history in computer science. But it was sort of on the downswing in Boston. And I did that for a year, and then I went to a company called Thomson Financial, which is part of Thomson Reuters, the big financial information and just information in general company. And I worked on a search engine there for financial documents. And then I got kind of bored, honestly, with web apps. And so I went back to graduate school. And I spent 6 years getting a PhD in robotics. So I did humanoid motion planning. So how do you move arms that look like human arms? And I did that mostly because I wanted to be a professor. I thought I wanted to teach. I did want to teach. And I went and was a professor for a couple of years at a small school called Union College in Schenectady, New York. And enjoyed it. It was really a lot of fun. But I was ready to move back to Seattle. And when you're a professor, you don't really get to choose where you live. So I came back to Seattle, and I took a job at Google working on web search. And I spent 4 years working on core web search infrastructure. So the summary was, if you did a search and you got a result that was about 12 hours old, it's coming out of infrastructure that the teams that I was on built, which was a lot of fun. Taught me a lot about scale, taught me a lot about impact, gave me that taste for what it's like to write software that lots and lots of people use. And then there was sort of a big reshuffling of people, and my team ended up moving to cloud. And there it was sort of like a time machine. I'd sort of stepped out of doing development when I went into graduate school, because I was focused on robotics and embedded systems, and stepped back in 10, 15 years later, and looking at how people were developing code, it seemed like there must be a better way, and that really inspired us to do the Kubernetes open source project, especially as Docker sort of did the hockey stick. And then obviously transitioned to Microsoft. A lot of the reason for that is I see the next generation being the developer productivity. How do we make it easier to build distributed systems? And there's this incredible DNA in this place around developers and developer productivity. And so that's the career. I mean, this is, I think Kubernetes is the longest I've ever done anything, at about 7 years. So it's cool. The number one advice I tell everybody, especially when they're starting out, is focus on learning. That's, people say, should I switch jobs? Should I switch companies and roles? And I sort of say, well, are you enjoying yourself, and are you still learning? Right? Because obviously we want to be happy, so you should be enjoying yourself. But learning is a really great sign of whether you're in the right place or not. If you're still feeling challenged, if you're still feeling learning, it doesn't matter if you're in the same place for 20 years. As long as it changes, as long as you continue to develop and learn. But on the flip side, if you've been someplace for 2 years and you feel like you know everything there is to know, it's probably a good sign you need some sort of change. And so I would really focus on, and I think learning how to learn and being comfortable with being uncomfortable, or being comfortable with not knowing, being comfortable with that process of going from knowing nothing to knowing a little bit to then really knowing nothing again to being, having some degree of mastery. If you practice that a lot, it becomes a lot less scary. It becomes a lot easier. You're like, oh, this is the part where I feel lost and hopeless. And you know that in 2 weeks you'll feel really good, and it carries with you. And if you don't do that very often, you forget what it was like. I think we forget what it was like to learn. So I don't know, that's probably the advice that I would give to people just starting out. Try lots of things. I think early starting out, I got really lucky and I had some really good mentors. And so I got a lot of advice about how to build software. I don't think that I stepped into the open source community quite as early as I could have. I think that might have been a little bit more, I've had a really good time and I've really enjoyed my career in general. But I think maybe there was some opportunities there, but I sort of found my way in anyway. And so I don't know. I think I've been lucky. One of the biggest lessons that I learned was to know when it's time to stop. Right? I've had projects and I've seen other people's projects where, they got so attached to it because they'd put so much time into it that when it was time to move on, it was really, really hard for them to do it. And they stuck with it, and it became way more painful than it needed to be to move on because they stuck with it way past the time when everybody else realized that it was done. I think that's an important lesson. You can't be attached. You can't get too attached. I told someone the other day, the inevitable trajectory of all software is death, right? Like every piece of software that you write is eventually going to be deleted. Even Kubernetes is eventually going to be deleted, right? And so accepting that and being comfortable with that is really important. Because otherwise you make bad decisions. You make decisions that have to do with attachment rather than with where the world is at. I think the other thing that I learned was the importance of community and working together. That's been a huge thing. That I was not always. I was a little bit more of a sort of solo kind of person earlier in my career, and I think that's been something that I've learned a lot of is how to delegate, how to let go, how to let other people do the work, and realize when it's time for you to move on and to let other people do the work. The goals for myself, they actually tend to span more than 1 year. Obviously I have near-term goals, want to make sure my teams are happy, want to make sure my products keep growing and things like that. I think the biggest thing for me is when I look at the systems that people are struggling to build, when I look at the things that people are building on Azure or anywhere else, it's just too hard. It's just still, I feel like people are banging rocks together. And I feel bad, I feel responsible, right? I feel like we need to do a better job building tools for them so that they can focus on their business and on their product. I love what's going on with like no code, low code stuff, but I think we need to figure out how we bridge it. Right? How do we take it from no code all the way through to really advanced code in a seamless way? Right now, it's these sort of siloed experiences. And so my goals, obviously, I guess for this year, but for the years to come, have a lot to do with improving developer experience for distributed systems.